Voting in at least 7 states has surpassed the 2016 poll numbers. Americans are heading to polls in the final hours of voting. Welcome to WION's non-stop coverage of the biggest elections in U.S. history. Also the most dramatic, divisive election that we've seen in America. We can tell you that Donald Trump spoke to his supporters in Virginia a short while back. His vice presidential running mate Mike Pence is spending his election day flooding the airwaves, doing 21 TV and radio interviews at local media outlets in battleground states. It's still a busy day for the Republican camp. Let's go straight to Andrew Whitehead, writer and senior journalist formerly with the BBC. He's joining us from London. Hello, Andrew. Good to have you back talking about another election. Last year it was the Indian general election. Now it is the US presidential election. Who are you putting your money on?
Well, great to be on WION for another election. I have to say I love elections. I love the excitement of elections. I love the uncertainty. And I get quite nervous as well. My hunch with this election is that the polls are right. They weren't 4 years ago, of course, but I think they are right this time. And I expect that Joe Biden will win. I don't think it's going to be a landslide, but I don't think it's going to be a narrow squeak either. My expectation is that he will win fairly comfortably. And in about 6 hours' time, more than 20 of the states will have finished voting, and by then we'll get some exit polls. And I think by then we'll start to get a picture of whether this is a clear and decisive outcome.
So we may have a clear trend or a clear understanding of who will go to the White House, but we're not sure if it will be a clear and smooth transition to power because Donald Trump has not given any indication that he will accept the result in the event of his loss. He spoke just a few minutes back and he said he's not prepared a speech to concede defeat.
Well, he has said that, and he does talk a lot, and a lot of what he talks isn't quite along the lines of the way in which he behaves. But I was rather taken by what he said just a few hours ago when he said that losing is never easy, not for me. And that's the first time I think I've heard him talk about the possibility of losing. And I really wonder whether the penny has dropped now that this is quite possibly going to be a very difficult day for him.
So do you think all the talk about this election ending up in the courts and the Supreme Court of America deciding who gets to go to the White House was a little premature? It may not come to that?
Well, it may not come to that. I don't think it was necessarily premature. It's certainly a possibility. There's a great deal of tension around. President Trump has, of course, questioned the legitimacy of mail-in voting, particularly as in some states when some of the votes are counted when polling has otherwise ended. And that's the case in Pennsylvania, one of the crucial states. But if this is a clear victory for one candidate or another, I don't think there's any question of it going to the courts. If it's a very narrow victory, if it's a victory where one or two states being flipped could make the difference, then I think that the Republicans in particular may well go to the courts and may well have to wait days or potentially even weeks for an outcome. But that's only if it's a wafer-thin result. My hunch is it won't be wafer-thin.
I was speaking to a political commentator from Washington a while back, and he said the biggest issue and perhaps the only issue in this election is Donald Trump and maybe the pandemic to a certain extent. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you think that this election is only a referendum on Trump and nothing else?
Well, he's been such a hugely controversial and deeply divisive figure that I think inevitably this is in large part a referendum on him. If this election had taken place a year ago, he might well have won because the economy was doing quite well. But I think his stewardship of America during the pandemic has been really difficult, really troubled. And the other thing that could have become an issue, which is Joe Biden's age, his health, his mental acuity, has not become an issue. If it had, I think that would have enormously helped Donald Trump. But the fact that Joe Biden has acquitted himself fairly well, even though he's run a fairly low-key campaign and spent a large part of it stuck in his basement home in Delaware, I think he's got through it without any serious blemish.
You'll be happy to know, Andrew, that we're being joined by Walter Anderson, former U.S. official in the State Department, author and American academician with us from Washington, D.C. Walter Anderson. Welcome back on WION.
Well, welcome to you as well. I'm happy to be here, and also with my friend that you've just been talking to.
So a lot of our viewers in India seem to want a Donald Trump win, and we know that some of them conducted prayers and all sorts of ceremonies were held. Do you think those prayers will be answered? Is Donald Trump on his way to securing a second term in the White House?
I don't think so. And there I agree with the answer of your previous speaker, with Andrew. I think that chances are likely that Biden will probably be the winner, but I'm not so sure as Andrew that it's going to be as clear as that, as early as that. If you look at the Real Clear Politics polling, which is probably the best poll on polls in the U.S., it shows that in the battleground states where the election will be decided, the vote is down. The difference is now down to about 2.2%, which is within.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Kamala Harris is speaking right now. We'll go to her quickly and then come back to you. Please hold on to that.
Everybody you should know, and let's get Gary back in the United States. And let's elect Joe Biden the next president. I'm done talking about the guy currently in the White House. You know, why? We don't need to do that. Let's talk about the opportunity that is in front of us right now, which is to elect Joe Biden, right? We're in the middle of at least 4 crises. Joe talks about them all the time, right? We're in the middle of a public health pandemic that has killed over 225,000 people in our country. People who sadly, so many, had to die and live their last days on earth by themselves because of the nature of this pandemic. They couldn't be with family members to hold their hands. And, you know, I've been through that process with someone, and if any of you have, to not be able to be with your loved one in those final days, to look at the fact that we're in a pandemic that has infected 9 million people who, thank God, have lived. But God only knows with what kind of long-term health consequences. And we have in our hands an option to elect a president in Joe Biden who understands, sadly more than most, what it means to go through being in a hospital with somebody, losing someone you love, understanding the dignity of life, the dignity of love, and the importance of caring for all human beings. We have in our hands and in our power the choice of electing a president who, in the midst of a mass casualty event of a proportion similar to World War II, who will lead with a sense of compassion and care. In Joe Biden, somebody who says, look, yes, President Obama and I pushed through the Affordable Care Act that brought health care to over 20 million people. Let's build on that, not take it away. Joe Biden, who says we need to continue protecting people with pre-existing conditions. Clap or honk if you know somebody with diabetes, blood pressure, or a breast cancer survivor.
Or taking care of COVID patients every day.
And taking care of COVID patients every day. And so Joe understands that. And he says we got to extend it. We have to bring down the cost of drug prices, bring down the cost of premiums. We should bring eligibility for Medicare down to age 60. Joe says, I understand that when we're talking about health care, the body doesn't just start from the neck down, it includes the neck up. And that's called mental health care. The choice we have right now is in our hands. The power is with us, the people. Think about this economic crisis. It has hit Michigan so hard. Gary and Debbie, Brenda, they talk to me about it all the time. When we're looking at, in America, over 30 million people filed for unemployment in just the last several months. When we're looking at folks standing and parked in food lines, 1 in 5 mothers describing her children under the age of 12 as being hungry. so many people, I think the number is like 1 in 6, who are describing not being able to pay rent last month or concerned they can't pay it next month. And Joe understands this, right? Joe understands that you don't deal with America's economy by doing what these other guys did, which is passing a tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations in America. When Joe is asked, how is the economy doing, you know what Joe says? He says, well, tell me, how are working people doing? How are working families doing? That's why Joe says we're not passing any taxes on anybody making less than $400,000 a year. Joe says we're going to bring down middle class taxes. Joe says we're going to pass a legislation and put in place rules and laws that say that working families shouldn't pay more than 7% of their income in child care. That we're going to have a tax credit of $15,000 for first-time home buyers, understanding how that can help with down payment and closing costs to buy a home. Because Joe cares about building up the middle class. He understands the way to do that is you fight for and protect good union, good paying jobs. And it's so good to be in the House of Labor. We have a choice in front of us, and the power is in our hands. Think about the long overdue reckoning on racial injustice in America. And Joe, being a student of American history, has the courage to speak the phrase, Black Lives Matter. Joe understands, you know, it may be difficult to think about or speak of or hear, but we have to confront the truth of things. We need to deal with racial disparities, yes, in our criminal justice system, and do that by a number of things, including decriminalize marijuana and expunge the records of people who have been convicted of marijuana offenses. Let's get rid of cash bail because people are sitting in jail for days, weeks, months just because they can't afford to get out. That's an economic justice issue.
So there you have Kamala Harris speaking to her supporters in Detroit. Walter Anderson, you were making a point, and I also want to mention that all of these people still sound like they're in campaign mode, perhaps trying to win over those voters who are still undecided till the last minute.
Yes, it's clear. It's interesting. You know, she focused in her remarks almost entirely on healthcare, which was an issue in the 2018 congressional elections. But she avoided several others as well. Like, she didn't touch on foreign policy at all. And she didn't touch on the lockdown and increased taxes, both of which they have said they will do if there is a discernible surge, and there seems to be the beginning of that as well. And those are very controversial issues. Those are the two big questions. One is the virus itself, and all over the world, leaders of countries where the virus has struck have tended to get the blame for it. India is a strange exception to that for reasons I'm not quite sure. And the other question is, of course, opening up the economy, which they have said that they would close down if there were another surge, and that would have, you know, major economic impact on the country. And it's not totally clear, given the polling, you know, where things will end up on tonight or the next day, because of the unprecedented number of mail-in ballots and also some problems about the counting of them. There are almost undoubtedly are going to be court cases. I saw a figure there already, some 400 across the country that have been placed before the courts. And it's going to take some time for them to be resolved. And if the Real Clear Politics poll of polls is accurate, you know, the elections are actually quite close in those 6 critical states. And in fact, some, you know, Trump has actually gone ahead in the polling. So we'll have to wait and see. I think we have to wait and see as to what's going to happen in these elections. But there are a couple of other interesting things about these elections that will come out that are not immediately obvious. One is there's a shift in the voting public in the United States. The white, and in fact beyond white, working class seems to be shifting to the Republicans because they have seen the establishment, and which many have identified with the Democrats, not sort of taking up their cause and allowing jobs to sort of leave the country. And so you have in those Rust Belt states of the Midwest that went for Trump and could go for Trump again, especially the working class in them, a sense of dismay. On the other hand, you see the establishments, the lawyers, the doctors, the upper middle class have tended now to shift toward the Democrat Party from the Republican Party. So what you have is, and these elections will show that, whether you have a shift in the electorate or not, and if so, that's going to be a very interesting development in this country as to where this election points us in terms of future developments.
Right.
And we'll also have to talk about foreign policy to a certain extent, because obviously in India, that's one of the major issues as to what extent will this election impact on foreign policy questions, because foreign policy has not been an issue in these elections.
Right, it hasn't been, and Donald Trump has complained about that. Andrew Whitehead, I want to ask you, how does the rest of the world see this election in America?
Well, by and large, I think they're holding their breath and crossing their fingers and hoping that the American voters re-establish the moral primacy of liberal democracy, because I think that really has been under threat over the past 4 years, and if Donald Trump is re-elected, I think it would be under very grave threat. It is almost 30 years since a sitting president has failed to be re-elected, but we are now in the middle of a real contest, and as I said before, my suspicion is that we will end up with a new president. But certainly, I mean, the level of interest in this election is huge. Everybody's going to be staying up tonight who has an interest in politics, even though it's going to be probably a very long night.
Right. Andrew Whitehead and Walter Anderson, thanks very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. Just a short while back, I also spoke to Voice of America's White House Bureau Chief Stephen Herman, who said that the road to re-election for Donald Trump looks like a very tough one. Listen to what he said.
Well, the phrase that a lot of the Democratic Party operatives have been using in recent days is too big to rig. What they want to see is what they're calling a blue tsunami, a wave of Democratic Party votes so large that it can't be contested. But if it is close, and as you heard the president say just a few minutes ago there, if we're waiting and waiting and waiting for those votes to come in from Pennsylvania, which would have been those mail-in ballots that are widely expected to be in favor of the Democrats, he believes that there should be a cutoff, and he is going to go to court to challenge that. Now, most of the political pundits that I speak to and lawyers are very skeptical that he would be able to preside in court with that sort of argument, because these are legitimate votes coming in. And I think the other thing to stress is, even if Donald Trump comes out tonight and declares victory, it doesn't mean he's reelected. The candidates don't get to decide whether they've won or lost. They can say anything they want, but that's going to be up to the states. And perhaps, as we saw in the year 2000,